Okay, so the theme of the conference this year is creative destruction. So I thought we should have a panel to discuss kind of what this actually means. And so think of this panel as creative destruction in the real world. And as most people here know, Joseph Schumpeter coined this phrase to describe the process, as we refer to it now, by which innovation sort of creates new industries and displaces or destroys existing industries and companies. It's happened throughout history, and it's become kind of a trope of our internet age, as new ways of doing old things, as well as completely new industries emerge. But the process of creative destruction and sort of innovation in general remains kind of a topic of discovery among all different kinds of people. For academics who seek to understand how the process works, for business people who want to either be the disruptors or avoid seeing their own industries disrupted, and government, which kind of struggles to keep up with rules and regulations as industries and markets change. And in this panel, we'll try to dig down a little bit and think about what this means in the real world, how entrepreneurs navigate a new business model through their respective market environments and what they worry about, whether creative destruction is the same thing as disruption, a phrase which is also dramatically overused these days, or are they different things? What industries are ripe for disruption? How do incumbents react to possible disruption? Is creative destruction even possible if an incumbent knows that it's coming? And how do their responses affect the direction of innovation? We have a really great panel to discuss this. We start off by have some people who actually do some things in the real world. First, I'll just introduce them quickly, and then we'll start in with them. We have Danny Boice, who is CTO and co-founder of Speek.com, which is in this year's Wall Street Journal Startup of the Year project, and I think they're down to the finals.
Yeah,
and they're in finalists. He began professional life as a software engineer for startups and became a serial entrepreneur with his first company, Juxara, in the early 2000s, and was recently named a Tech Titan by Washingtonian Magazine. And then you'll see in the original program that we had Lisa Falzone from Revel Systems, but in keeping with the theme of destruction in the conference, which Tom began last night with his leg, she had a herniated disc and wasn't able to travel. So we're pleased to have Chris Chabera, who's the CTO and co-founder of Revel Systems. And after founding the company with Lisa Falzone, he developed the technology behind their iPad point-of-sale system and is responsible for technological advancements and security, system security. He has a long list of invention and design accomplishments and is also an anti-hacker expert. Now, Varian is chief economist at Google, where he's been involved in auction design, econometric analysis, finance, corporate strategy, public policy. He's an emeritus professor at UC Berkeley in 3 departments, business, economics, and information management. He's probably published more articles than I can read. And then we have Laura Martin, who's a senior analyst for entertainment, cable, and media at Needham & Company, where she covers the largest internet entertainment and cable companies. She also founded Media Metrics, where she ranked as the best of the independent research boutiques by Institutional Investor. And Joshua Gans, who's professor of strategic management and holder of the Jeffrey S. Skoll Chair of Technical Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. Also, he's a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research's Productivity, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship program, and he also already has iOS 7 on his phone and is wearing a Pebble watch. And I'm Scott Wallsten. I'm Vice President for Research and a Senior Fellow at the Technology Policy Institute. Okay, so I'd like to start with the entrepreneurs, and so we'll start off. I'd like to take a few minutes and tell us about, so Danny, tell us about your company. Who you think are your closest competitors. Who are the sort of the big incumbents in your industry and the biggest problems you face?
Sure. So Speek is disrupting the teleconferencing space. So I'm sure everyone in this room has been on a conference call. You dial a phone number, you dial a PIN. You probably also dial more numbers a lot of times. It's really kind of been this really poor user experience that's been around for decades and really hasn't been innovated upon at all yet. And our biggest competitors in this space still use that same model of dialing in that same pattern, but a lot of them are doing it for free using this kind of arbitrage traffic pumping scheme that many of you I think probably already know about. The way Speek works is instead of a dial-in, we give you a link. So speek.com/Danny is my conference bridge. I can give that out to anybody using my Outlook calendar or my Google calendar, just stick it right in there. When you go there to join my call, from any device, anywhere, you can just click a button. It'll join either through voice over IP, or if you're on a mobile phone, it'll join just by dialing through your dialer. So it's a dial-in, but it does it for you, and it's one button click experience. So we made it fast and easy to do conference calls. And then secondarily to that, once you're on, you can actually see who's on your call, see who's talking, instead of just hearing beeps whenever people join, which is very insecure. And we've kind of added a bunch of other additional features that just generally fix the conference call. So we're an early stage startup, we're seed stage, we're funded by a blend of venture capitalists and angel money. My co-founder is John Bracken, who was one of the Evite.com founders back in the late 90s. And we're about 1 year old, and we've already grown to about a couple 100,000 users, and we're growing at about 50% monthly on every key metric. Just hit post-revenue status last month. So I think that covers all of it, right?
And yeah, sure. And so where do you see Speek.com and the industry itself, say, in 5 years? I mean, do you imagine kind of taking market share around the edges, or displacing?
I think we have the potential to disrupt the entire industry. People don't realize that just the pure audio teleconferencing industry is a multi-billion-dollar annual revenue industry in North America alone. It's how most business people still kind of communicate remotely. The WebExes and I think it's the unified communications products I see as kind of a different space and a different use case, and are used by different people for different reasons. So I think we're in a good position to completely disrupt that industry, and that's what we intend to do.
And for growth now, what do you think is the biggest problem you face?
For growth, the biggest problem we face is, so it's technically very difficult, as many of you probably know, to do audio teleconferencing. Maybe it's not if you're a big telecom person, but we're internet entrepreneurs. So we had to actually learn and hire top talent, VoIP, mobile, web engineers, and really build this team that could understand all those different aspects. So we're actually converging, we're playing in both spaces. It's a lot easier to build Twitter or Instagram than to build something that's got both web, mobile, and telephony components to it. So the technology challenges have been pretty difficult for us, and have hindered growth early on. I think we've resolved those. Now we're growing at such a rate that I think we've proven that we have. But it took us a good 6 months to get the audio quality to the point where it needed to be.
And you mentioned that even as a small company, you had to hire through H-1B. You had to sponsor H-1B.
Yeah, as far as hiring talent is the hardest challenge, I think, for any startup. I think fundraising's up there, it's difficult, it's extremely hard to do, but getting A-level talent, which you need to if you're gonna actually figure it out before the money runs out as a startup. So we've already had to go H-1B. One of our operations person who was a former Sunrocket, a lot of the larger kind of VoIP and telecom players early on, is Canadian. So we actually had to pay for his sponsorship in order to hire him, and he's one of the best you could get for that role, and it was well worth it. But for a 14-person company, we've already had to both offshore and sponsor.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Could you, tell us again, start about your company and where you fit in your where you fit in your market. Who are your biggest competitors and sort of the biggest problems that you face going forward?
Sure. So Revel Systems is a point of sale company. Everyone's heard of Square. We like to think that when you graduate Square, you come to Revel. We do a lot of different enterprises. Some you heard of: Goodwill, Popeye's Chicken, Coffee Bean. Just a few of some of the enterprises that we work with today. We're 90 employees right now. We raised $10 million just last month. We were profitable since last quarter last year. We're 3 years old currently. The system is a lot more than just a point of sale system. If you look at the current point of sales out there, the incumbents, they're very locked down. You really can't do much with them. With Revel, you're able to communicate to the cloud, and the cloud basically talks to all the point of sales out there. So you can plug in, get any information that you want, throw down loyalty programs or whatever you need to do to connect into all these different point of sales. So going forward, it's got huge potential. So.
And who are these incumbents?
Micros, a multi-billion-dollar organization, Aloha, NCR. Those are the three big ones.
And going forward, what are the obstacles that you all face?
Well, we face a lot of obstacles. Mm-hmm. Some technical, and some, hiring obstacles. When you're a startup, you're trying to hire the best, and you don't have the biggest budget, right? So when we first started the company, actually, we had to go overseas to get our employees, and now we're starting to bring some of those people into the U.S. because we want them here, right? And the bigger you get, you want your employees right next to you. So the biggest problem I think we have is hiring, and other companies stealing your hires, offering double the salary because they're a multi-billion-dollar company, and now they can just take your employees. So it's pretty tough. Technology-wise, I think, Wi-Fi, if you're familiar with Wi-Fi, it's one of the most problematic issues that we have for the point-of-sale system because we're on a tablet-based system, so the only way we connect is Wi-Fi.
So you mentioned hiring problems and the multi-billion-dollar companies who might hire away your talent. So Hal, I know you have lots of things to say, but possibly as knowing one of those companies that might hire other people's talent, how does the issue of one big company bringing in lots of talent affect the ability of other companies to innovate? And of course, there's the other side too, that Google is possible exit option for companies, and so lots of companies want to enter a market because there is this possible exit option.
Sure. Well, there's a continual flow. If you look at a lot of the Googlers who were pre-IPO and stayed with Google afterwards, then a large number of them became venture capitalists and flowed out, started other businesses. So there's a kind of ecology here between the big successful companies who then go on to spawn other companies. So it's a two-way street. I will say, circling back to this creative destruction point, go back a decade or so to the internet boom or bubble of the late 1990s, 2000s. There was a huge amount of investment going on then in both physical capital with fiber and with human capital, learning how to manage this web environment. So when that popped in 2001, 2002, this was just the time when Google was one of these little companies and was able to hire a bunch of talent who really knew what they're doing, this A-level talent that worked for options. So what's happening now is because we have this very competitive, very rapid innovation period, of course it's going to be hard to hire people. But as that weeds out, I think the human capital is created by all of these people who are able to work in this environment is going to contribute to future productivity growth.
Another thing that you've written about and talked about, and that I think even some of these companies take advantage of, is how what you've called it combinatorial innovation,
yes.
Right? How we've turned fixed costs into marginal costs, and how that's sort of affected this landscape.
Right, so the idea there is there have been a lot of periods in history where you've got a set of component parts that could then be combined and recombined into new innovation. So think standardized mechanical parts in the 19th century, think electrical standardization of component parts in the 20s and 30s, then digital integrated circuits in the 60s and 70s, and now we're with this period where we have software components. And the great thing about the software components, things like LAMP, Linux, Apache, MySQL, Python, they're just bits. So you don't have material constraints of limiting the availability of those parts. The physical constraint is the limited ability of people who can work with those parts. But nevertheless, you can get a lot of innovation going on by drawing on those things. And now with the cloud computing, many startups are utilizing the cloud. They don't have to invest in their own infrastructure. What was previously a fixed cost now becomes a variable cost. And so you can get this capability of doing the combinatorial innovation on relatively standardized platforms. And the final point I'll make about this is it's really a global phenomenon. It was very interesting to hear this point about the H-1B visas because many of these small startups, in fact, are born global. They're global from the beginning because they'll have contractors, they'll have workers, they'll have employees, they'll have investors from around the world because having this very inexpensive communication competing infrastructure allows you to be a micro-multinational company that has multinational scope but is still at a rather small stage. I think that's a very exciting development because it means you can get an entire planet working on innovation.
And do we see that yet? How do we see that playing out? do we see, is it sort of only so far American companies started in the US that have been able to go elsewhere, or do we see companies from outside being able to disrupt industries in the US?
So you see companies, you see Angry Birds, you see Voice over IP, you see LAMP. If you think about LAMP, it's all European. You've got Linux from Finland, you've got Apache, which is admittedly US, but came out of CERN. You've got MySQL, which is Swedish, and you've got Python, which is Dutch. So all of those component parts came from outside the US, but they've been adopted on a global basis. If you look at the situation in the US, I think it's the most developed. If you go up to south of Market Street and knock on a few doors and talk to these small startups, almost every one of them has a global connection of some sort or another, as I suspect you guys do or will soon. And that's actually quite unique, because it used to be global multinational meant these big companies with expensive technology. Now anybody can be a multinational.
So this, I mean, this may be a little bit off topic, but as fixed costs turn to variable costs and presumably make them much lower, does that end up looking as if we're investing less in new companies, or that companies invest less because they don't need to invest as much?
Yeah, it looks, you're right. I mean, what was an investment on one side of the ledger now becomes this ongoing monthly cost, and it's a different picture from an accounting perspective.
Laura, in the panel that we just heard, Tom Talkie mentioned that kind of allocation, investing in these infrastructure companies becomes more difficult because they focus exclusively on near-term ROI. Now, as our Wall Street person, before we get back to the topic at hand, what did you think of that?
So, I'm going to say yes and no. So when you look at it analytically, there's 3 reasons that he's right, and it's getting worse over the next 5 years. And I'm going to add a little footnote of but in the name of John Malone. So let's get to that last. What's happening in the world is when you give $1, Wall Street allocates capital, right? So when I buy a share of a broadcaster or Comcast, the only opportunity they have to generate revenue against that dollar of investment is gated by national borders. What is different about the internet and what the Silicon Valley is doing is when I give Google or Facebook $1, they have the option or the ability to generate revenue over 1 billion people globally. So if you're buying a share of stock, you should buy the stock where you can give them $1 and they can generate revenue over 3 times as many people. So one of the things that's happening is that resources are becoming more scarce to companies like Comcast or Time Warner that don't even have national scale, they have regional scale or local scale. The return on invested capital is poor compared to a global internet company. Second, innovation. These 2 entrepreneurs are completely indicative of what the internet is creating. And in the analog world where I come from, covering cable and entertainment companies, a typical ratio of employee to revenue generated is 2 to 3 times. You pay somebody at Disney $100,000 a year. Typically their productivity, if you divide Disney revenue by employee, $250,000, $300,000. So you're paying them 1/3 of what they're earning. You get to these internet companies, the number today for Facebook is $10 million per employee. It's 100 times. So the productivity when these work, I was at Disneyland on the day that Facebook bought Instagram. It bought 12 employees for $1 billion. Standing in front of me while I waited for my car were 12 employees of Disney, my valet service. So there's 12 employees here, and they're parking my car, and there's 12 employees at Instagram that are worth $1 billion. So with all this innovation, they're very capital unintense, and when they work, not many of them work, but when they work, the return on capital is literally infinite, practically. Last point I'd make about why he's right, and it's getting, let's call it worse, is because asset flows in my world have become more rapid. When you manage money as an institutional investor, you are aggressively benchmarked quarter to quarter. And with the financial crisis since 2008, there has been 100% turnover of money managers. It is very hard for me to find a money manager that was managing an enormous portfolio in 2007 and is still managing today. Often they've changed jobs 3 times. So the point is the pressure on asset allocators is much more intense as the markets have gotten more challenging. So you don't have the luxury of investing for 3 years or 5 years because you're going to lose your assets. The public has become smarter. They've lost so much money. A lot of money sitting in cash. You've probably read that. A lot of money sitting in bonds. You've probably read that. So equity markets, the people who actually manage money, must get these calls right, or they lose all their asset flows. Okay, ... footnote John Malone. At the end of the day, there are, let's call them, courageous entrepreneurs who really do make a difference. As you may know, if you know anything about John Malone, his core strategy is not paying taxes. That is his strategy. You ask him, how do these 3 companies fit together? None of them pay tax. That's the only pattern you can find. He's a genius. He's a genius. I covered him for a long time when he was at TCI, and I covered Barry Diller. And the difference between the two is 5 years later, when you look back, you can figure out exactly what John Malone was doing. It was a linear progression. He was just 5 chess moves ahead of the rest of us. With Barry Diller, it's a Picasso, but you have no idea how he got the paint on the canvas that way. You couldn't recreate it no matter what. So, but John Malone, if he comes back into the cable business, he now owns 27% of Charter. He's trying to get Charter to buy Time Warner Cable. I think he may well succeed because Wall Street is not that happy today with the Time Warner Cable numbers. We'll see. He's a genius. We'll see. The point is, the right thing for the cable industry is to triple capital spending, take the hit to the stocks, move everything IP, which you could standardize components, you could bring down costs, and you would pay no tax, because that's capital intensity, for 5 years. Because right now, they're fall taxpayers. Time Warner Cable, Comcast, they pay 40% taxes now. This makes John Malone insane. And it's, right, by the way, the wrong business decision, because you're sharing revenue with the government, and they should be spending money on moving all of that digital plant into IP, I believe. So, in theory, I believe that he's right, Congressman, and that's what the market analysis would tell you, is we're just going to get kind of cash out. But I got to tell you, John Malone is a guy to watch, because I think he could change the world. Because once if he comes in and he takes, so Comcast would have to follow his lead, I think. So anyway, we'll see. We'll see.
But in part, is that because of it affects how incumbents will respond
Yes.
to changes in?
Absolutely, because if the biggest, they would become, if Charter and Time Warner Cable merged, they would be as big as Comcast, and now Verizon would have to react to that competitive reality. Satellite companies, I think it would trigger a merger. Charlie has said through his, Charlie said on these conference calls he's willing to merge. I think it would necessitate a merger if John Malone starts tripling capital spending. They spent $70 billion the last time they did a capital upgraded digital. I think it could be 50 to go to IP. And that's a lot. I mean, that would have a huge impact all the way down the supply chain. And it means your competitors would have to react also.
So do you think the infrastructure, cable, and other video distribution platforms have responded well to sort of new types of media, new types of video delivery mechanisms, video aggregation mechanisms, Netflix and so on? Or do you think, has there been a problem with their strategy that looking at it from the point of view of the incumbents, how have they reacted? Has it been good for them, or are these suggestions you're making because they haven't responded appropriately? And then how would any of these affect what the new entrants like Netflix and so on should do in response?
Well, I think what the world's done today, I know you guys are talking about convergence of modems and televisions. I will tell you, I don't think Wall Street is with you on that. I think, and I wrote a piece, and the first sentence was, I was wrong. The TV and the modem are not converging. It is the mobile phone and the PC that are converging, this shift to mobile. So I don't think we think today what the incumbents have done is keep separate the high-speed modem, and it is now merging with mobile devices and television. I can't tell you that's the wrong thing. So far, it's really been good for the stocks. Stocks are up 40% a year. All this TV ecosystem, all the stocks are up 40%. Things like Disney, that are huge companies, up 40%, 60%, well outperforming the S&P, because they're taking all their enormous free cash flow and returning it to shareholders. So markets like that. I think, as a market analyst, I think that's a metric of successful strategy today.
Joshua, I suspect you're going to have lots of disagreements with many things that I've said here. So tell us your take on, you've done lots and lots of research and studies of disruption and economics of digitization and so on. So, tell us your thoughts on.
So I was interested in this, the entire session of this conference, the whole theme focused on creative destruction. It's a word that people seem very comfortable with, but I wonder what images it provokes. We named one of our venture labs at the University of Toronto the Creative Destruction Lab, and when I heard it in that context, I thought about looked like it was a scientist in a frenzy of activity breaking a lot of beakers, is the process of creative destruction. I think we have the same issues coming up with the word disruption as well. Disruption, some of you in the room might, a disruptor you might recall were in Star Trek, the phases is what the good guys had, disruptors was what the bad guys had. The word disruption has had this connotation. It's, from a lot of talk in this room, it's for incumbents to fear, but it's also been thrown at would-be entrepreneurs as your goal is to disrupt. And as an economist, that seems to me a rather odd goal to have, in the sense that suppose you, in a classic form, identify an opportunity that's marked by existing services provided by incumbents at very, very high margins, and it's been stable for some time. And you see that there's a change in technology such that you could reduce those margins. You could do whatever they're doing at much lower cost if you could just convince customers to adopt your product. That would be the classic opportunity for disruption. Now, the one problem with that is if you employ that technology and disrupt an industry, what's in it for you? It's, as we've noted before, it's great for consumers, but what's in it for the disruptor themselves? Because if you make the industry highly competitive, where prices are now close to true cost that they ought to be with the latest technology, there's not much to appropriate there, and it's hard to see where you're going to raise capital for that. There are situations at which people have other motives and have been quite successful at this. The great example of this is, of course, Gmail. Gmail came in and it disrupted what was looking like being a very profitable web email-based system that Yahoo and others were doing. Now, Google could do that because Google didn't care about making profits, at least not directly, from Gmail. It had other agendas, and it was easy for them to deploy the resources to change that aspect of it because they just didn't care. And I guess Apple would think that they're doing the same thing for mobile operating systems too. So one is you have another motive because you have another business, and you're just disrupting an industry because they're collateral damage, which is fine. The other is that you could have disruption coming from people who don't care about making profits. These were some of these examples of people investing in open source technology and developing things just because, putting it out there. Minecraft came in and disrupted a healthy portion of the video game industry and took a lot of attention away just for the fun of it. So that can happen. But there's this final category, which I think our two examples here seem to fall into, and another firm falls into as well as an example of it, is where disruptive strategies is where firms choose to compete head-to-head with existing incumbents by focusing on execution. You can imagine lots of startups, and certainly ones that we've advised in the past, we say be very cautious about entering, make sure you control your idea, make sure you control your IP so not as to get an incumbent response. Well, these guys don't do that. They blast right into the industry, and the way in which, the bet in which they're going to make profits is that they're going to be just that much better than everybody else when all is said and done, that whatever the solution is, wherever this industry settles down, they'll be part of the plan. And that will give them their power. Another good example of this is Dropbox. About a year ago, I looked at Dropbox and Google and Microsoft with their huge cloud infrastructure, vertically integrated, had entered that space. Apple were looking to do the same thing. And you had to say to yourself, how could a startup of only a few years vintage possibly compete with that? Surely they were going to be collateral. Why would anyone pay for what they offer when Google and Microsoft are going to have pretty much incentives to provide it to their existing customers, maybe new ones, for free? And the answer turned out to be, which is why Dropbox is still with us, is for reasons that, take someone more technically adept than myself to understand, is their service works just enough better than anyone else's that they're there. And that may be by dint of know-how that they can extend and others can't replicate, but it turns out to be a much harder problem, and that's what's allowing them to do it. So they're focusing on execution. And I think in that sense, we're hitting a different landscape here with these disruptive firms, where the advice is going to change, not to focus on, finding these opportunities to disrupt, but to make sure that you've got the ability to make sure you've got something in the tank that's going to leave you on top when the battle is over.
Do you have a sense of which types of companies end up being the ones that are actually disruptors? Are they the ones who charge in because and believe that people will end up paying more for their service because it's better, or is it those who, for reasons that economists can't explain, don't mind just getting rid of basically eliminating the profits in the industry?
Well, that's really an open question. It's still an open question and something we desperately want to study. So basically, is it a very focused, rational plan, or is it just an entrepreneurial type who is looking to make their mark? And fortunately now, as Hal already mentioned, the components are cheap and they can get quite a distance before they run out of money. And could it be that process? That's what we really want to understand. I don't actually know.
Hal, yeah.
Yeah, I had one comment on what Josh said, and it's not so much that they don't care about a profit, it's that they're enabled to forgo short-term losses in order to create a long-term profit. So one of the advantages of being a large company is you have this ability to invest in things that aren't going to pay off for many years later, and I think all the examples you mentioned were cases where there is a payoff, so that they're profitable in the long run.
Danny?
Yeah, one more thing I wanted to add too. I think in terms of Dropbox being a good example, and what Speek is doing is we're getting a lot smarter about viral mechanics and the impact that virality has on being able to disrupt an incumbent. So if you look at what Dropbox did and what Facebook did, and when most of the companies who have come in and just all of a sudden completely disrupted an industry, Evite did it too, and they competed with every big player in the world. They were inherently viral products that, in order to use those products, you had to invite a friend in some way, shape, or form, or invite somebody else. So Speek, the reason we've raised money on such a high valuation is we've taken a dial-in conference call, which is not viral. There's nothing inherently viral about that. Like, you have to see a bunch of phone numbers and you don't know who you're talking to. With Speek, if you host a conference call, every person that hosts a Speek call converts 1 out of 5 of their participants every single time. So just by using our product, we grow with spending almost zero money on marketing. And I think one of the common themes I've seen around really highly disruptive, at least internet products, is they really understand viral mechanics. Like, Skype understood network effects really well, and that's how they were able to grow so quickly. Facebook, same thing. But just understanding viral and virality, I think we've gotten a lot smarter now, and that's a key component to being truly disruptive and really taking down an incumbent. Because when you're inherently viral, your lead widens, and it's a lot harder. Forget technical, defensibility. It's a lot harder to catch up with someone who's got a lead that's incredibly viral and has really truly figured that virality out.
Chris, do you agree with that? Because it's a different.
Yeah, I like to say disruption doesn't always just mean a cheaper price or cost having to do with disruption. The way we took it was our incumbents, they have infrastructure across every single city out there. So we actually chose to go a disruptive path, which was going direct. So all of our sales come in direct, and like you said, it's very viral. We spend nothing on advertising, and everyone comes to us. To date, everything's been direct for us. So,
Should we take some questions? Oh, sorry. We're ready with the microphones. Oh,
Laura, just in your discussion off of Tom Talkie's comment, you said that there were positive things about the short-term investment that Wall Street perceives, but then you said there were destructive or things that you didn't agree with. And I don't know if you elaborated on the other side of the coin.
In terms of being short-term?
Yeah.
Short-term,
I know the
long-term?
short-term always, I mean, that's what we see today, but is there cases where the short-term is really not in the best interest of the company and they can't make those long-term decisions which are needed for capital investment?
Well, I mean, I think one of the frustrations I've had with Washington generally, and I don't know if it's a Wall Street frustration, but it certainly is one of mine, is that I really feel that Washington has taken the side of these internet entrepreneurs. But, you know, when you look at who runs the cable business and the satellite business, and maybe not so much the telcos, these were guys who started by digging trenches. Largely the CEOs are still intact, or their kids, that dug trenches. So when these guys mortgaged everything and bought a system not knowing whether TV would work, that was a long-term investment. When they spent $70 billion upgrading their plant, in fairness, it was because they didn't have a better product than DirecTV, so they did it for competitive reasons. I think today, in order to spend the next 30 to 40 billion to upgrade to IP, it takes a CEO that cannot be fired. And so if John Malone comes in and does this, the stocks will be down 40%. The guy who announces he's about to upgrade to IP and it will take him 4 years to do it, the government will pay 40 cents on the dollar because you're going to now spend $40 billion and you're going to amortize it over 5 years. So he's going to stop paying tax, so the government pays 40 cents on the dollar, but the stock will get creamed because the return on capital plummets compared to what's embedded in the share price of today. If you're Verizon, you get fired. Unless it's Brian Roberts, who controls his board, Jimmy Dolan, who controls his board, John Malone has a big enough piece of Charter/Time Warner Cable that they can't get fired, and Charlie Ergen can't get fired, controls this company absolutely. Then DirecTV, as a response, can convince his board that he's going to go out of business unless he follows, or Verizon and AT&T, but they must follow because they have to take the share price hit in order to do the infrastructure upgrade. But it is my view that these industries are doing the government's job faster, more economically, with a focus on cash returns, because they're not trying to destroy their net worth. They're just spending money and taking the near-term share price degradation because they know that when they come out the other side, they're going to have standardized products and higher margins for long-term. They're not doing it for the good of the country. They're doing it for long-term returns. It is really hard to do that in the public markets today. So you have to have absolute control of your company or you get fired.
Before we go more questions, I want to ask another thing. Hal, you've in an older paper, you wrote that that sort of the destruction part of creative destruction may be more important to innovation than the creative part, right? And so I'd be interested in in hearing a little bit more about that, and then also how the two how Danny and Chris think about that, since you might it's if you follow that logic, it's conceivable that the exit that you create is more important than in terms of the economic growth than the products you're creating.
Well, I think it's an excellent issue. If you look at venture capital, it's got very long tail returns. 9 out of 10 companies fail. But if you think of this model of combinatorial innovation, that you've got to explore lots and lots of different spaces to find out what really works. And so you want an industry where not only is there free entry, which kind of everybody will buy into, but there's relatively free exit, that it is easy to get out of the business. And here in the US, we have free exit compared to Europe, where it's much more difficult to exit an industry than it is here. Several years ago, one of my students wrote a thesis about tariff reform in Chile, where there was a huge round of exit and entry as industries adjusted to this new tariff regime. And she found that in general, the entrants were no more efficient than the incumbents, but the exiters were definitely more inefficient than the incumbents. So in fact, it was a completely Darwinian model. You wanted to have a lot of mutations going on, many of which were maladapted, but the productivity of the entire economy advanced because the non-productive enterprises were weeded out and the capital could be put to more effective uses. I think that's the kind of world we live in.
Do you think that, I mean, is that true when you're looking sort of more narrowly at a given industry or part of an industry? I mean, I guess Danny and Chris, I would imagine that you're more efficient than, or at least you need to be more efficient than the incumbents, right?
Right. I mean, the way I've described disruption is, in terms of our industry, is we're not really there to disrupt. We're there to fix. Like it's broken. Like there's a bad experience for the end user that they've just accepted and kind of thrown their hands up in the air, and no one seems to do anything about it. So we want to fix it. And in fixing so, we're going to be probably highly disruptive, I would assume, to the incumbents who have the bad user experience or providing this bad user experience and aren't innovating. So we're kind of forcing their hand, and that will lead to either us winning the market and creating some new highly successful business, or getting bought because someone gives us a great offer, or exiting in some other way, shape, or form along the way. So I almost think, in my mind, disrupting for us is more like fixing. We're fixing something that's broken. We're not just trying to be, disruptive.
Yeah. If you want a successful company, the first thing you want to do is ask yourself, what are you fixing, right? And that's what we did. And that's, I think, if you want a successful startup, you have to fix something out there. As far as exiting, we want to rule the world, so we're not looking to exit. So,
Laura, this actually might, this relates to things that you've written about and talked about, which is the difference between industries and firms when you're talking about disruption. Sort of what's the right unit of analysis, and then I wonder whether that affects how we go back to think about Hal's point about looking at broader economic effects.
Yeah, I started life as an economist, and so that's a microeconomist at that. And over time, my coverage, what I publish on, has been the cable industry, the content industries, the CBS, Viacom, Time Warner, Fox, and now I cover the internet space. And I think what I've come to believe is the wrong unit of analysis is companies, and the right unit of analysis is industries, and that just might be media. I mean, maybe it's not relevant to semiconductors or energy, I have no idea. But in my world, I think that the reason that the TV ecosystem is so robust is the ecosystem works together to protect itself, like what are those dinosaurs that used to get in a circle and their babies were in the middle and their armor plates were on the outside with big tusks? That's kind of how the TV ecosystem is protecting itself today. So I think that the right unit of analysis is the ecosystem of kind of suppliers. And I think one of the issues the internet companies have that I compete with is they all think they're competing with everyone. And that's a problem, because if you think you're competing with everyone and so you keep pissing off new incumbent value chains, when you irritate one person in a value chain, all of their friends become your enemy. And they're all targeting their cannons at you because you've disrupted one of their pieces of their value chain. And so that's actually I think a problem. So I think that the ecosystem, when you're allocating capital, as is part of my job, I really look at the ecosystem and how well the ecosystem is working together, and whether or not component parts are trying to undermine the ecosystem, not so much companies.
Does Apple and the music industry contradict that, or does it help make your point? Because it was a firm.
Well, I mean, I guess what I would, so I covered music when it was public. It's no longer a public industry, they've all gone private. But I think one of the things that's happened is that industries learn. So you may recall at the beginning of music, we had a lot of piracy. And so the record labels were earning zero. And so Steve Jobs came to them as their savior and says, I can get you paid 99 cents per song, and that's better than zero. And so they all gave him their content, and they let him sell it at a unitarian price point of 99. And the result was that it unbundled the album. That no one was paying $10 for an album for the two songs they wanted. They were paying 99 cents for the two songs. And so when you looked at the chart of what happened to music revenue, it was going down at about 5% a year. And then the minute there was legal there was legal, let's call it, the ability for mass consumers to have legal, it suddenly came down 70% over 3 years because of the unbundling. Now, having said that, Steve probably did the right thing, but what the industry did wrong is they didn't keep pricing power. Because 5 years later, when Steve was sick, Apple allowed the music industry to tier where their biggest hits are now $1.27, lots of stuff at 99 cents, and deep libraries 63 cents. And even that change from 99 cents to $1.27 tripled the amount of $10 bundles that people buy, $10 digital albums. So if the music industry had kept its pricing power rather than just straight 99 cents, the unbundling would have happened more slowly. But so the point of all this is the TV industry and the film industry have learned. They're not just going to and therefore they're more afraid of Google than probably they would be if Steve Jobs hadn't destroyed 70% of the top line of the music business, in fairness or not. So all of the incumbent ecosystems, I think, are more afraid of digital alternatives because of what happened with Apple in the music business.
Joshua, I think you might have a slightly different take on Apple and music and ebooks.
Right. It seems to me that seems a little disingenuous anyway in terms of where these industries are heading. I think the issue with music, it took a while to work out the pricing, that's to be sure, about how to do it. I mean, one of the things that led to album sales was when Apple decided when they allowed Apple to have a complete My Album. If you'd bought 2 songs, you could buy the rest of it for the increment. And so it's as if you could try a single and then buy again. And that was at that same time. In ebooks, we're seeing all manner of the same issues. And what's disturbing about that case is, why are the publishers so strange? They really are strange. They tell themselves that basically their books don't compete with one another. If somebody wants to read a Stephen King book or a J.K. Rowling book or whatever, that's what they're going to read. There's some competition for attention and things like that, but ultimately, the price of that book is not going to matter whether you buy the book of another publisher. So these guys aren't really competing. Yet they try and do everything in their power to see if they can control the price. I mean, they had their biggest retailer, Amazon, was willing to take whatever wholesale price they gave and then sell their books with greater units at a loss, seemingly, and they were upset. Most businesses where somebody is willing basically to subsidize your sales, that's wonderful news, but these guys saw it as a threat. Now, we know why they saw it as a threat. They didn't think it could sustain itself, or it wasn't clear how it was going to work. But publishers have been like that forever. And similarly, I think the same is the case with television. I mean, the amount of, and this is where the international context becomes up. You yourself said, look to the global ones. Well, content provision in television is very global, but it acts as if only the United States matter. For years, they would do licensing deals, exclusive license deals, all sorts of things with other countries without regard to any of that. We're going to get some revenue from that, whatever they want is fine. And then they were surprised when these countries ended up restricting content, delaying it by 6 months, the internet came along, and the very countries which they didn't care about were the biggest sources of piracy. In other words, they'd neglected these markets, and these markets basically left them to become pirates. Instead, if they were to maintain a global strategy, they could think of things differently. They wouldn't have all these little regional deals. They would have a payment system that would flow back to them in the United States, regardless of where people were consuming them. And it's those sorts of blinkers that sort of, I think in the television industry, amongst any, has people jumping up and down saying, I'm looking for my disruptive savior, because there's some craziness there.
Hal, did you want
Yeah, I was going to say something about this global issue because it's come up several times. Let me tell you what Google did in this area. Back in the period when we were a startup, sort of 2002, we had volunteer translators who would translate all the Google help files into their own language. And as we got bigger, of course, we wanted to be able to manage this ourselves. Eric Schmidt in 2004 came out with the 40 language initiative so that every new product release had to be available in 40 languages within 6 months of its release. Now, of course, we have Google Translate, which you guys are welcome to use for your own purposes with a little human editing. It does a good job, and the result is more than half of Google's revenue comes from abroad. So it's very important, even for small startups, to think on this global scale, because if you can get your foot in the door in these foreign markets, you will be in a very, very good position down the road. And it's a heck of a lot cheaper to do it now than it was 10 or 20 years ago.
Actually, that's a really good case of Google Translate. All these television markets that are in foreign languages, which seemingly are immune to piracy and other things like that, it's not long before they're just going to be able to run the television programs through Google Translate, and that'll be it.
Well, actually, if you look at Khan Academy, we worked with Khan Academy to do the translation for that, which is a piece of cake because it was a single speaker and it was a fixed vocabulary, all this stuff. It made a gigantic difference in terms of accessibility of that content.
Right.
One of the things I want to say is going global is great, but why are we going global, right? Why aren't we keeping all these jobs in the U.S.? And it comes down to a bunch of reasons, right? One is the cost of our employees, and two is bigger companies stealing our employees, right? Not to bash Google, but Google did steal one of our recruiters, which set us back 2 months, right? I mean, we have a recruiter full-time recruiting employees for us, and these kinds of things happen, and that's why we chose to go overseas, because no one's going to steal our employees overseas. They'll steal them here, but they won't steal them over there. So,
we still have a few minutes left for questions. Yes.
Scott, I want to go back to Laura's discussion of Malone's bet the ranch proposition, and that was going to be, or I not put words in your mouth, but kind of tax-based in terms of his analysis. I wonder how someone who's making that kind of a bet can make that bet with the kind of tax system that we have today and the upheaval that's potentially there. So you have bonus depreciation expiring at the end of the year. You've got different variations of tax reform, all across the spectrum. So there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, and you have state and local taxes now being imposed on digital goods, and those are being imposed at telecom tax rates from 17 to 20%. Internet tax moratorium is expiring at the end of 2014. It just seems like there's a whole lot of uncertainty in what the basic rules of the tax system would be for someone to make that kind of a bet in this environment.
Is that directed at me?
Yes.
Oh my God, I'm a tax attorney now. No problem. Okay. So here's what I think, this is exactly worth what you're about to pay for it. So not much. So I think that American tax policy has always, this is a way for the government to subsidize the next phase of broadband deployment. And if you really want convergence between the TV and the modem, then this is what you must have. You must have the TV system become IP-based, because that's what the modem is. Then you can get convergence. Then you can get hundreds of entrepreneurs creating new product that converge social with content. And that should be the next step. If we don't converge the devices, what will happen is the center of gravity will move towards the modem, because the innovation, I'm just going to point at you guys as if you're all Silicon Valley, the innovation in Silicon Valley is IP-based, which is a lower entry barrier, more creative, easier to access. That's where the visionaries are going to make their first billion. So it's IP-based, which means, and so what will happen is the TV QAM-based system will become an island and slowly lose power. The way to save both screens is to take, in my view, take the plant, spend enormous amounts of money, make the whole thing IP-based, and now you can converge devices in the home, out of the home. Big TV screens, little mobile personal devices. But so long as you have a QAM versus IP-based system, what you will get is what we have now, which is portable. Consumer demand for portable devices is growing at triple digits and has been doing so for 3 years. So the consumer's telling you he wants things out of the home on portable devices in new windows of time to make himself more efficient. So the IP world is going to get tons of entrepreneurs and tons of innovation, and the TV will become stagnant. So, I think the tax code should encourage that. It does encourage that so long as you're putting capital in the ground. It allows for accelerated depreciation. The cable industry traditionally has used that. You cannot be an employee, your board will fire you. You must have an owner-operator that can control a board vote in the hellish investment period of 4 years.
And I think with that, we're going to have to move on to the next panel. So please join me in thanking these panelists for what I thought was a very interesting discussion.